On the morning of December 7, 1941, at 6:10 a.m., the Wickes-class destroyer, the USS Ward, fired its first shots at the Japanese submarine, the HA-19, as she was entering the entrance to an American lagoon harbor on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. This action would become the starting point to what would become one of the deadliest attacks in U.S. peacetime history, the attacks on Pearl Harbor. As a result of the attacks, the United States of America joined the Second World War and became the last country to win the war in 1945. But because the war affected the ocean liner community as well as the world, in this video, we are going to look into the entire events of Pearl Harbor itself. The story of Pearl Harbor began with a strained relationship between the Empire and Japan, which lasted before the attacks themselves. In the early 20th century, Japan had ambitions to model its economy and military to become an independent empire. However, the country had the natural resources it needed to make its independence happen. These three resources were coal, iron, and oil, and they were well needed. But rather than negotiating with their neighbors, Japan launched battles and conquered countries in the Asian and Chinese provinces. Even before the beginning of the Second World War, the world began to be concerned about Japan's actions and watched every move from them. When America learned what had happened, they decided to pass economic sanctions against Japan. This meant that America would refuse to provide the resources Japan needed for its empire, and America had also frozen Japan's assets, meaning that Japan could not buy any supplies from America. As a result of this, Japan lost 94% of its oil supply from America. In response to this, Prime Minister Hideki Todo signed the Tripartite Pact with Adolf Hitler in Germany and Benito Mussolini in Italy. Then they planned to reclaim their oil supply by force. Having their supplies cut off by America in July of 1941, the Japanese government and the Imperial Japanese Navy collaborated to devise a plan to attack America at its weakness. In November, with the assistance of the Navy's Admiral Yamamoto Ishiroku, who had connections with Washington, D.C. and Harvard, having studied and worked in the States, the Imperial Japanese Navy ordered an armada of submarines, ships, planes, and aircraft carriers to travel to Hawaii, where they would attack the U.S. Pacific Fleet base at Pearl Harbor. America knew that because of their actions, any attack from the Empire of Japan could happen at any given time. Mainly in the nearby European colonies in the South Pacific, which include the Dutch East Indies, the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force were prepared for deliberate action, but little did they know that on the 7th of December, the Empire of Japan would attack the base of the United States. At 6 a.m. on the 7th, a first wave of Japanese planes were spotted flying above Pearl Harbor after they were lifted off from the aircraft carriers from the Imperial Japanese Navy. 10 minutes later, the first shots were fired from the USS Ward when crew members saw the HA-19 entering the harbor space. Later on, the Ward tried radioing the U.S. Naval Headquarters, but the decoding process delays the message. Meanwhile, the Imperial Japanese Navy broke their silence after waiting for a signal from their captain. Masuo Fuchida shouted Tora, which meant tiger, decoded message informing the Navy that the Americans were caught by surprise. The attacks continued for nearly 2 hours, and following the attacks, the Imperial Japanese Navy immediately set their course for the Philippines, where they attacked the US and British bases before heading home to Japan. Pearl Harbor went up in smoke, and Maine people were left traumatized. Out of the 100 U.S. warships and service auxiliary ships that were docked at the base, only one ship managed to survive. and that ship would be the U.S. Coast Guard cutter the Tandy. 3 ships, the USS Arizona, the USS Utah, and the USS Oklahoma, were permanently lost. The rest of the ships had to endure 6 months of being repaired after being refloated onto the surface. As a result of the attacks, 2,403 U.S. military service members were killed, while the Imperial Japanese Navy lost 129 of their soldiers. Sadly, however, this could have been prevented as a decrypted message was delayed in sending to officials in Washington before the attacks began in the early hours of the morning. If it hadn't been for the delay, lives could have been saved. The next morning, on the 8th of December, the U.S. President, in front of an enthusiastic group of senators, declared a date which will live in infamy and declared war on the Empire of Japan in a famous speech which inspired men to join the fight to protect their country. America and Japan would engage in a 4-year war until the 2nd of September 1945, when the Empire of Japan surrendered to the United States through a series of documents that were signed on board the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Today, the United States celebrates VJ, or Victory of Japan Day, every 18th of September. The attack on Pearl Harbor became an important event in U.S. naval history, and although this kind of attack wouldn't happen again until the events of 9/11, Pearl Harbor showed us that no one is safe from danger, and how one major war event could cause damage not only between 2 countries, but the rest of the world as well.